Um, and so with that, we'd like to welcome Ka-Voka Jackson. Ka-Voka is the Restoration Projects Manager for the Middle Fork Willamette Watershed Council in Springfield, Oregon. She studied ecology at the University of Nevada and has spent her career focused on ecological restoration, traditional ecological knowledge, and watershed health. We're excited and happy to have her here today to talk about oak savanna and woodland restoration in the Willamette Valley at the Thurston Hills Natural Area.
Hi, everyone. Are you viewing the right screen?
We are seeing your presenter view right now, actually.
Okay, let me see. Sorry about this.
Oh, totally fine.
Is that working or?
Yeah.
One more time.
Okay.
Okay. Is this still doing presenter view?
I can see I'm waiting for it to go into the slideshow. If you click from beginning one more time.
I am, but it's not showing up. I apologize about this. I wasn't.
That's okay. I can also try sharing it and for you if you want to just indicate when you want me to go to the next screen.
Is it still on presenter view?
It's not in Preventer, but it's in like editing mode.
Yeah, okay. Maybe that would be helpful. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what's happening here. I can't get it to stop.
Okay, I have your presentation pulled up and okay. Can you see that?
Yes, I can. Okay. Thank you.
Just let me know and I will forward the slide for you.
No problem. Okay, so thanks everyone. Thanks for bearing with my technical difficulties there. So I'll be talking about today the oak and prairie restoration that we've been doing at the Thurston Hills Natural Area. That's in partnership with Willamette Park and Recreation District, who also own and manage the Thurston Hills Natural Area. So you can move to the next slide. I wanted to acknowledge that Thurston Hills is located in the Willamette Valley, which is currently Kalapuya land, also Kalapuya Ilihi, as it's known. And so the Kalapuya peoples lived in the Willamette Valley since time immemorial before being forcefully displaced in the early 1850s. It's important to acknowledge that the Kalapuyan people were land stewards of the valley, and there are particular cultural and lifeway techniques that they use to steward the land and to manage the land. And that also included seasonal burns, which over the course of thousands of years resulted in unique ecosystems, such as oak and prairie and savanna habitats that are fire dependent or disturbance dependent. Okay, next slide. And so actually, can you go to the next slide? I feel like this is a better representation. So this map shows, which comes from the Oregon Conservation Strategy put together by ODF&W in 2004. The left side of the map shows the Willamette Valley and its distribution of grassland, oak woodland, and prairie habitats in the early 1850s. And you can see, so the yellow represents the grasslands, the prairie and savanna, and the brown represents the oak woodlands. And so these habitats dominated the Willamette Valley prior to colonization. And so now the current distribution of those habitats, or the 2004 distribution, on the right, you can see that those have considerably shrunk. And so now it's estimated that about less than 5% of oak woodland habitats remain and less than 1% of prairie habitats remain in the Willamette Valley. And so it's important to note that a lot of organizations and different agencies have come together and acknowledged the degradation of these habitats and the loss of these habitats. And so there's a lot of strategies that have come forth and a lot of planning that has come forth to address these issues. Next slide. And so this is just a beautiful picture of Thurston, but once again, we care about these habitats because of their unique nature. There's a lot of species that are dependent on oak and prairie and savanna habitats that have evolved over the years, as I mentioned, and are still of cultural importance today to descendants of the Calipuyan people who lived here, as well as for the wildlife and habitat value, maintaining that biodiversity and trying to restore and conserve what we can. And so, next slide, please. One of these organizations and partnerships, of which the Middle Fork Willamette Watershed Council, as well as Willamette Lane Park and Recreation District and IAE are all together in the Rivers to Ridges group, which has focused on a landscape scale vision of conserving and restoring identified habitats and priority habitats. So this map here kind of shows it's a vision map of our open space and parks within the Eugene and Springfield metropolitan area. And R2R as a group identified anchor sites throughout this metropolitan area that serve kind of as like the important landmarks on the landscape. And one of those is Thurston Hills Natural Area, pointed out by the yellow arrow there. And it's on the eastern Springfield urban growth boundary. So next slide. A little bit more about Thurston Hills, another kind of location map right there. It is about 665 acres managed by Willamette Lane. There's also a conservation easement through BPA on some of the property. And the management of this property has been guided by the management plan that was put together by Willamette Lane and partners, and I believe 2016. Next slide. And so in that management plan, it was identified that there was habitats that were of priority but were degraded. You can see that in some of these pictures that the conifers are encroaching on oak habitat, as well as the understories are being invaded by invasive species. There's blackberry present, there's false brome, shiny geranium, and teasel, and hawthorn, and as well as some invasive fruit trees like pears and apple trees. And so these were all identified in the management plan, and areas within the conservation easement area were prioritized as habitats that the management plan wanted treated first. And so next slide. There are some unique aspects about Thurston Hills. One of this is the recreation opportunities. And so you can see that here kind of shows a quick overview of the trail system there. And this has been put together with acknowledgement of the restoration that's happening in the area, and trying to guide and make the experience of the recreationalists optimal, given that Thurston Hills is really close to a lot of residential areas and also has some really high quality habitat there. Next slide. There's also a lot of natural features within Thurston Hills that we love and that we care about, and we want to highlight and kind of uplift where we can. There's a lot of wildlife that use the area. We've seen signs of bear. There's elk herds that come through. There's also a lot of special bird species concern. There's the acorn woodpecker that's highly associated with open prairie habitats that's been spotted before. And a lot of different plants, a lot of prairie plants. And so these are kind of the things that we were thinking about when the Middle Fork partnered up with Willamette in terms of trying to focus on restoration within the area and what we wanted to do. So next slide. These objectives kind of boiled down to the habitat restoration and conservation. The open prairie was our target. We also wanted to do a lot of public engagement. There's a lot of high public use in the area, really close to residential areas, and the recreation aspect as well. Wanted to make sure that all the locals and residents were aware of what we were doing and trying to get their support for that as well. And then fuel reductions. As I mentioned before, the conifers that have begun to overcrowd and encroach on the oak, woodland, and prairie habitats also pose a fire danger, as well as the overgrown understories that exist. And so one of the objectives was to reduce the fuels loads in those areas in case fire were to happen on the landscape. Next slide. And so we focused on using these methods for our project. We thought about weed control before and after oak release. So going through with hand tools or using some machines to kind of treat the blackberry, the overgrown blackberry, Scots broom, and other invasive species that are present and encroaching either in the understory or in the open prairie areas. And so this was done before and after oak release. And then for the oak release, we used a combination of methods. There was machine logging in areas where it was accessible. There was also a lot of hand removal of the smaller diameter trees, as well as creation of snags and girdling trees and topping the trees to create a complex woodland habitat. And then of course we had our vegetation component where we went through and planted and seeded in those disturbed areas to uplift the native species component. So next slide. So we started, of course, with our public outreach first. We sent out flyers, notified the public of what we were doing, set up signs around the restoration area. There was a lot of social media outreach as well. We also did some other events. There was some public talks and tours that happened, and this was within 2018. Next slide. And then we began our work. And so here are just a few pictures of the project in action. Like I said, we had some mechanical removal that was happening in areas of dense trees or where the trees were encroaching on the open prairie. Lots of hand tool usage and crews that were able to help us with the invasive plant management and some thinner diameter trees as well. And this took place, started in about March of 2018, and most of the work happened throughout that season through the fall of 2018 for the oak release. So next slide. And here you can kind of see the before and afters. On the left are the befores. And so you can see how there's a lot more open space, a lot more light penetration, which allows the understory to promote the native regrowth, as well as the regrowth of the oaks. There's the epicormic budding and branching that happens on oaks when the light penetrates and they're able to branch out more widely rather than growing in a very crowded environment where they become very skinny, spindly, and weak. So we are seeing signs of that happening on site as well, which is very exciting. Next slide. We took advantage, we had an opportunity to do some drone imagery, which we found super helpful for oak restoration and visualizing where the work happened and how it happened. So the left is pre-project and on the right is post-project in 2019, I believe. And so there you can kind of see patches of areas where the conifers have been removed. There's a lot more light penetration. You can, in that kind of lower right corner of the picture on the right, the after, you can see the road more clearly through the trees than you can pre-project. So there was a, so yeah, the visuals are awesome, and it's really amazing to see what all of that work can do. And we were excited to see some improvements in the area with the regrowth as well. So next slide. And so that was the first phase. And like I mentioned before, the Thurston Hills Management Plan identified a few priority areas. And so the white outline, the white polygon was our phase 1. And we came up with, William Wayne, and with the use of BLM funds, came up with a fuels reduction phase area that went along an access road, which covered about 25 acres of oak habitat. Next slide. And so you can see here, this was the state of the road kind of before in the top pictures, where it was very overgrown. There was a lot of blackberry that existed. The oak trees were really overcrowded. There was some encroachment happening there as well. And so with the use of some BLM grant monies, they were able to get some crews out there and open up those oaks along that road as well. Next slide. And so here you can kind of see the results of that. It's a lot more open. You can see through the trees a lot better. The blackberry presence is significantly reduced, and maintenance is currently ongoing in this area to kind of keep that understory clear and make sure that we're getting that native plant recruitment that we're hoping for. Next slide. And so all of this happened with a lot of outreach, as I mentioned. It was pretty important for us in our projects, and as well as everyone, the neighborhoods and the locals. We had guided tours, we had ivy pooling event, we also had a planting event we had a planting event during the project phase 1. That was pretty successful. And so just want to say thank you for everyone who was involved. It was really, really motivating for us to get that kind of participation and involvement from the community. And I think it helped our project out a lot as well. So next slide. I'm kind of running out of time, but this is just to highlight, we did do some other flyers after the project to kind of highlight some of our work and the different birds, species that were there. We also had a volunteer bird survey happen at the site. Next slide. And so now we've kind of moved on to preparing for our third phase. Next slide. And so this third phase is outlined in the purple polygon. And so you can move on to the next. Sorry, I'm trying to go a little fast. We had a lot of help from the University of Oregon Environmental Leadership Program and their 2019 Oregon Oaks team. The team went out and surveyed our phase 3 area and measured the densities of the oaks in the area and kind of mapped out the densities and prioritized which areas should be of highest restoration priority. So next slide. These were the number of oaks and how they ratioed out the site. The blue outline was the highest density of oaks. Next slide. And this was again mapped out in this way so that it could kind of give us more of a spatial view of what we were looking for in the site and where to focus our work at. Next slide. And so that resulted in the first map I showed you, where we have the first priority in red, the second priority in yellow, then white, and then blue as fourth priority. So next slide. And so we used this data as well as some additional help of drafting a grant from the University of Oregon ELP to help secure funding for this next phase. And so we just got notified by the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board this past fall that we were approved for funding. And so we are planning to start our project this year for our phase 3. So next slide. We started with last year doing another bird survey to kind of get our pre-project species of concern and to see where they're at on the lands, or where they're at in the phase and how many were present. And we plan to do the same post-project. Next slide. And so this is kind of just showing the current state of the project area. And so you can see there are a lot of great oaks present, but there's a lot of encroaching conifers. The prairie and savanna areas are becoming encroached with the blackberry, as well as other invasives like teasel. Next slide. And we've had some work start up. Willamette Lane contracted some youth crews. The Lane County Youth Crew came through and did some mastication work to begin treating that understory invasion, especially of the blackberry. Next slide. And so just wanted to say we're excited to start on this project. We're eager to get going and to begin some more of the project planning in order for us to begin our oak release. So we're gonna hopefully get crews out soon to start doing some more understory treatment, and also have help from the Rivers to Ridges Oak Group, which will come out hopefully and do a site tour and give us some more advice on specific treatments for specific areas. Next slide. You can go on, sorry. Yeah, just more pretty pictures of Thurston. And notifying, or just, we would be doing the same format as our first phase, where we do some science talks, social media outreach. We hope to do more site tours, COVID allowing, and of course, more flyers and informational posters and of that sort, to let everyone know what we're up to. And I believe that's it. So thank you. Sorry for going over a little bit. Thanks to our partners at Willamette Lane, and also the help from the U.S. Forest or Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, the OWEB, of course, and all the other partners that have helped out with giving us advice and implementation. So with that, I take any questions.
Thank you so much, Ka-Voka. It was a great presentation. So just a reminder, we are now going to have quite a few minutes for questions, and I will be pulling them from the Q&A box icon you see at the bottom of your Zoom. And again, if you see a question that you would like answered, please like it, and the questions with the most likes will be moved to the top. And so that way we can make sure we get those answered during our allotted time. So with that, Ka-Voka, it looks like our first question is asking, what planting methods do you use for the oaks? We have little success here in the Applegate with planting from pots. We have more success spreading out acorns across the landscape.
Most of our plantings have been focused on the understory. So we've focused more on planting understory plants and shady plants to kind of fill in the space where we've done invasive species removal and tree removal. Most of the problem, especially in the oak woodlands, is an overcrowding effect that happens, specifically conifers and other brush and herbaceous type vegetation come in and overcrowd the oaks. And the oaks can even begin to overcrowd themselves. If too many oaks are growing in an area, they can grow, or if they're grown just in a really shady, tight area, they don't grow like the big, nice white oaks that we kind of think of. They become really tall, spindly, not a lot of branching, which makes them prone to breaking with wind, ice storms, stuff like that come through. And so going back to the planting, we focus, after we do a lot of that removal, we've focused our plantings on kind of the understory component. And so we might have planted a few oaks, but I believe we focus more on other species. But I have heard that using acorns can be successful, especially if you have barren, disturbed ground. The acorns seem to do a lot better in those types of habitats.
Awesome, thank you. And then the next question we have is, what is the long-term management plan for blackberries and conifer encroachment at your sites?
So right now, in the phases where we've already implemented restoration, there is ongoing maintenance that Willamette is doing. And so that includes a lot of, like in the prairies and meadows, a lot of mowing that, to keep the blackberries down and all of that, as well as in the understories, like we do have crews that come out and do mastication work to come in to try and keep that blackberry population especially under control. We have had treatments on some of the false brome as well that's coming in on those understories. And so that's for as far as our management plan and maintenance plan for the area. We're just planning on doing that repeatedly for the next few years to kind of just combat that first kind of invasion. A lot of these plants are really resilient, like blackberry. And so if you don't get after it for a few years in a row, it'll just keep coming back. But eventually they'll become kind of beat down enough to where then the native plant species can come in and start taking their place and hopefully crowd out the invasive plants.
Gotcha, great. And then are you seeing any natural oak recruitment on the site?
There are some natural oaks that are coming in, some baby oaks that are coming in. Yeah, we do. We have seen that and are seeing that. And we are trying to protect those areas as well. Yeah, it's been very exciting.
Yeah, that's super exciting. And then were the weeds controlled with herbicide too, or only manual control? And if the latter, are the weeds or weedy trees coming back quickly, or are they well controlled?
So we are doing a combination, especially because we're not necessarily, there's not a water source on the site. We do have a little section of wet prairie in our phase 3 area that we're being mindful of. But for the most part, there's a lot of mechanical control. We have used the herbicide control, I believe, on the false brome especially. And I would say, the herbicide use tends to help keep them at bay longer. But we have seen some of, regardless of whether there's herbicide or mechanical use, there's always some amount of regrowth from those invasive plants. They do appear to be getting less, but it's still kind of a battle at this point in some areas, especially.
Yeah. And then I think we have time for about one more question. And so what did you do with all of the woody debris left over after the tree removal and weedy tree control?
So our larger trees, were sold as timber, and that helped fund the parts of the project. The other woody debris, we did do some burn piles. We got a permit and we're able to do some pile burning as well. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Maybe we'll do one more, actually. So have severe drought conditions affected restoration efforts? And what are some of the ways you were able to adapt and overcome that?
Yes, I would say that drought has begun to affect restoration. It's making especially survival of any plantings and seedings kind of more slim. The survival isn't as good as it could be. And so that's kind of been a struggle, and we're just persistent and kind of, we've had to be adaptive in our timing during the year. I think we all experienced last summer, the heat wave that came in pretty early summer. And so that also affects the plant life cycles and how quickly they dry out, and also our fire restrictions. And so we kind of have had to be adaptable to that, especially like, for example, the burn piles and fire restrictions. Our window sometimes is shorter depending on how long the fire season is. And also some oaks seem to be doing better than others. sometimes with oak release, it also gets rid of the shade, causing the soil to dry out a little bit quicker. And it appears some trees are better at handling that than others. And you know, also the how shallow the soil is can affect that too. So mainly timing and yeah, just being creative with our strategies.
Great. Thank you so much, Ka-Voka. That was a great presentation. I think we're going to start transitioning over. That's all the time we have for questions.
Thank you.
So I will pass it on to Alexis. Thank you.
Great. Yes, thank you, Ka-Voka. That was full of some really beautiful photos. It's nice to see some on the ground project work. And again, if you have a few minutes, it looks like there's still quite a few open questions. So if you wanted to answer some live or go through some follow-up emails with folks.